This is exactly true. So let's continue. Verse 17. He, Antiochus III, will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom and will make an alliance with the king of the south, and he will give his daughter in marriage. And again, Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra in marriage to the 12-year-old King Ptolemy V in 194 BC. To overthrow the kingdom, Antiochus III hoped that by this alliance to overthrow the line of Ptolemy and gain control of the Egyptian empire, but his plans will not succeed or help him, and his daughter Cleopatra I became very loyal to the Egyptian monarchy. Ptolemy V died in 181, and Cleopatra I died in 187, leaving no Seleucid influence over the Egyptian empire. Then he will turn his attention to the coastlands of the Aegean and will take many of them, such as Cyprus and Crete, but a commander, history says of the Roman Lucius, so we're being introduced a little bit into the Roman Empire at this point, will put an end to his insolence. And Lucius, with 30,000 soldiers, defeated Antiochus III with his 70,000 troops in Asia Minor in 190 BC and turned his insolence back on him. So the struggle continues between the king of the north and the king of the south. After this, he will turn back fortresses towards his own country, but will stumble and fall to be seen no more. And Antiochus III died in 187 BC, slain at Elymais. His second son, Antiochus IV, was among some 20 hostages taken by Lucius to Rome, where he spent the formative years of his life. He later became the dreaded persecutor of the Jews, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He gave himself the name Epiphanes. We know what an epiphany is, a bright, shining kind of as almost a godlike name. In verse 20, his successor, Seleucus IV, son of Antiochus III, will send out a tax collector, Helidorus, to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, however, Seleucus IV will be destroyed, yet not in mob anger or in battle. Seleucus IV was actually poisoned by Heliodorus. He, Seleucus IV, will be succeeded by a contemptible person. Now, this is where things change. It's like, oftentimes, as you know, the prophets will prophesy concerning something current. And you think of Joel prophesying about a locust plague, and all of a sudden he's propelled in to the last days, and he sees the Spirit of God being poured out on all flesh. But the prophecy started out concerning this locust plague that Israel was facing. Oftentimes the prophets begin with a legitimate, kind of irrelevant, localized prophecy, but all good prophets are propelled into the future and end up in the day of the Lord, at the time of the end. And what I did here on this, the rest of this, I took out the history by the NIV Bible because I don't believe it's right from this point on. They continue with history rather than the view that we have that this begins the career of the Antichrist. And what I've done, I've gone back to verse 45. Look on the next page. And I've taken the antecedent and I've followed it all the way back.
Good. That's good. Amen.
To verse 21. Because if you follow it's talking about one person here all the way back to verse 21. So, yes, there was an Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a wicked ruler that did great, horrific things to the Jews. But from this point on, it does not fit Antiochus Epiphanes. And another reason we do it is because all of a sudden this phrase called abomination of desolation is inserted in here. And if it was fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes, why would Jesus then say in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, if Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled that, Jesus never would have said. So all of a sudden Antiochus Epiphanes fades out of this picture. The prophet is propelled into the last days, and he's describing a detailed career of the Antichrist. So we're going to continue on. What time is? Do you want to continue on? I don't want to even go eat. It's 5:40. 5:37.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick point. To appreciate Daniel 12:10, which makes this amazing statement. Now, if this prophetic fulfillment comes about with the kind of detail that we expect, with the clear lines of recognizable signal events, and God's people are very conscious that they are in that time as we expect, here's what's interesting. It says in Daniel 12:10, just real quickly, it says, "Many shall be purified and made white and tested." But this is the phrase that has always captured me. "But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." How is it that such a prolific fulfillment of prophecy can pass by the world without there being at least an understanding that prophecy is being fulfilled? There's something so interesting here, because and you can take a little bit of a lesson from what the liberals do with this chapter. They say, with all the books of the Old Testament, they try to date and so forth, and as you know, they have a trouble with the miracle of prophecy. You know that. Well, this is the one book, the book of Daniel, which they insist that can be authoritatively and most certainly dated to 165 BC. The reason being, because here's what happens. As we just came out of verse 20 into 21, introducing the vile person, the contemptible person, which they make to be Antiochus Epiphanes, you go down through the chapter, and some of those early things were in fact fulfilled, at least in measure. Part of the problem is they weren't exhaustively fulfilled, and some of the details don't add up. And scholars on both sides of those conservative and liberals have struggled with that. And so the conservatives, they want to find a fulfillment for things that may not be there because they think that happened in the past, but because they believe in an inspired scripture, that kind of helps their apologetics to show. So that kind of escapes their notice because of the zeal to try to fit it with the past. But the liberals are all too happy to recognize discrepancies because they think Daniel's got a sketchy knowledge and so forth. But now, with the career of Antiochus, he seems to be very precise. And this fades without any alert, without any detectability into eschatology. So what I mean is a record of, final events like resurrections of the dead, that kind of thing. So they believe that the author has this history behind him. And that accounts in their view for why he's so accurate. But when he makes an attempt to talk about what he expects Antiochus to do, and how he expects Antiochus to come to his end in a final deliverance, this being a pious pseudo-author, what do you call it? When you're taking another name, it's a pseudonym.
Right.
His being a pious patriot, he, in this pseudo-Daniel, he actually ventures to speculate that Antiochus fulfilled things up to this point. You'll see this in the commentators. And I'm making a point here about what's really going on spiritually with the world, with us, and why this is all going to happen right in front of the world and they won't know. That's what I'm talking about. So what the scholars say is that the author, who could record things so accurately because he's cheating, okay? It's really a pious fraud is what this would be in our view, but they make a case that he's doing it all for sincere reasons and that kind of thing. So when he ventures to say what he expects Antiochus to go ahead and do, Antiochus doesn't do it. And he starts talking about resurrections and the death of Antiochus in a way that Antiochus did not die and other things. And so they say, well, that's where it passes from history into prophecy, and that's why we know, because he blew it. He expected Antiochus to do those things in his pietistic view of how the covenant would be fulfilled, and God would defend Israel. And in that, he shows us exactly where the prophecy, where the book is. And for that very reason, not to labor you with something, but for that very reason, they give this book a 2nd century BC date. And here's the thing. The reason is this graduates almost without notice from accurate history into a type, and without notifying you, it turns into total prophecy. And that's why so many look at this and they put it in the past. That's why Brother Phil is laboring to show us that these things do not match up with Antiochus. But Antiochus did indeed serve as a very remarkable type. We don't want to empty this of the remarkable parallels, but at many points, those parallels, I won't say many, there's a few points where those parallels do not match up with what's known history about Antiochus, especially at a certain point when it clearly goes into things about the final tribulation.
And
Okay.
just to reinforce that point, he comes to his end in the Holy Land, Antichrist. Antiochus came to his end in Syria.
Trying to raid a temple
Yes.
of its treasures.
So let's read this, and then after we come back from dinner, we will go into the details. But let's. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's continue in verse 21. And I took the antecedent halfway through verse 21. So we've got to talk a little bit about Antiochus because he was part of history. But let's just read. He, Seleucus IV, will be succeeded by a contemptible person that he was succeeded by Seleucus' younger brother Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who had returned from Rome, who had not been given the honor of royalty. Demetrius I, the young son of Seleucus IV, was next in line to receive the crown, but the throne was seized by Antiochus IV Epiphanes in 175 BC. So he was succeeded by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, but now it changes. This is where I see it changing, personally, from my studies. He will invade the kingdom, the Holy Land, when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Where have we heard that language before? Remember in Daniel chapter 8? Let me just read it again in Daniel chapter 8. In the latter period of their rule, when transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue.
Which verse?
Verse 23 of Daniel 8. In the latter period of their rule, when transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. And then remember we talked about he will destroy many while they feel securely or at ease. And so this is just repeating that same language that we had in the description of Antichrist, who then was destroyed without hand at the end.
My translation says, by peace he will destroy many.
Yes.
Because this is a peace covenant. It's a peace lie.
Okay, so we go from history that's been
Accurately fulfilled. Yes.
accurately, and then right there, the first key there,
Yes.
that's where you
That's
feel
where I see the
just
career of Antichrist beginning.
And there's a measure of double fulfillment there, because there are some things that Antiochus did in fact do in the 2nd century BC that parallels very closely with some of this. But there's also some discrepancies in some of the fine details. But there's a point there where actually, he even slew a swine or whatever, and offered the broth on the altar as an offering to Zeus. So even there was a stopping of the sacrifice. He did those things. But it goes on to talk about things he never did. And so there's a mystery, there's a mysterious overlap and overlay. That's why these things can come upon us in this generation. We're putting them in the past. What there is basically a reiteration or a repeat of the same exact pattern, only this time more exhaustively and comprehensively fulfilled to the letter.
Yes. But look at the language now that is introduced to us and the reason why I take it back this far, and I believe Reggie has
I sure
himself.
do. I share that with you.
This is still Gabriel talking.
Yeah, Gabriel's telling the whole story. Yes.
Last words were well over in 10:17. Who am I that you're talking to me?
Right. It's been the angelic messenger ever since that point. Right.
So this is God's message that was sent to Daniel that took 21 days to get to him, what we're reading. This is the awaited contents of that vision, that great conflict that he saw, the great war. He had a vision, and the angel came. Gabriel said, I'm telling you what will happen to your people in the latter days. Now, building up on that, it led through history to a certain point, but now we're in the latter days. Let's follow the antecedent.